For leading the prayer for us. Last week we talked about Judges chapter 1, and that would be chapter 1 and verse 1 down to chapter 2 and verse 5. And we painted a picture of decline and downward spiral. And I think, at least the way that I called the class last week was military decline. And I think we made the case. You see why that is, military decline, because it starts with Judah going out and all of the good things. You've got leadership, you've got cooperation, you've got people doing what they were told to do, all of what they were told to do. You've got everything at the top as it is supposed to be. And then you've got fear and a lack of faith. I can't do that. And then you have I won't do that. And then you have compromise until it finally ends in, I guess it's not finally ending, but at the end of this spiral, what you have in verse 34, 134, is Dan. Dan gets pressed back into the hill country. He has zero. He's got defeat. He's at the bottom. There's nothing here. And then it ends in chapter 2 and verses 1 through 5. And that is this angel of the Lord who we've met before. We've met this angel in Exodus, and we met this angel in Joshua. And the angel has said previously, if you will obey God, then I will fight for you, and we will defeat your enemies. But now the angel says at the bottom of this downward spiral, you get nothing from me. You've not obeyed God, you're out. Is there any comments from last week left over about military decline that you want to say before we move into tonight's subject? Let me tell you what, I feel very strange right now because I put new batteries in my hearing aid and I cleaned them and I turned the setting so that I sound like I'm being very, very loud right now. So hopefully I can hear you all tonight, but it sounds like overwhelming to me right now. But if somebody talks, I'll be excited to actually hear what you have to say. Maybe, hopefully, we'll see. Okay, so that's going to move us into tonight. Tonight, let's start with this before I'd say, you can see it on the board. We're going to talk about religious decline. But what I think you do have an actual intentional break in the text here. Because it starts in Judges 1 and verse 1. It says, after the death of Joshua. And then in Judges chapter 2 and verse 6, we're going to talk about the death of Joshua again, which is kind of like saying, okay, we're going to start again. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to talk about something different this time. In verse 6, when Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, and who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gaash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. Now here's going to be what introduces us tonight. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. Let's just stop there for a second. What does that remind you of, that sentence?
To me, kind of Genesis, because it says a lot of the breaks in Genesis are, these are the generations of, and here we're being introduced to another generation. But I know we're quite a ways away from Genesis.
Yeah.
But that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm asking too. It's just because I don't know that there's an intentional reference here. Let me read it again. Let's see if I read it this way. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord. It reminds me of Pharaoh in the beginning of Exodus. And there arose a Pharaoh who, what? Oh, It's that extra sound. It was probably like 3 houses down or something. That's what I was hearing. And there arose another Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph, who didn't know about these people. And so that's what it reminds me of. It doesn't, I read that verse and it just sends a shiver down my spine, and I think, uh-oh, there's trouble coming whenever I hear that. And so tonight what we're going to do is we're going to talk about religious decline, a couple things about this. This is going to be the judge's cycle tonight. And so for those of you writing down notes, you can write your notes however you want. I don't care, obviously. You can do whatever you want on that. But let me tell you ahead of time what we're going to do. So as you get through each one of these points on the cycle, whether you write it in your notes or not, just remember it this way. A, B, C, D, E. Everybody can remember that. We're gonna find a word that starts with each letter of the alphabet, so that even if you can't remember the judge's cycle, you can remember, okay, this starts with this letter and it means this is coming next, so you'll be able to remember the judge's cycle. The very first part of the judge's cycle is going to be apostasy. You could also do abandon the Lord if you wanted, but apostasy is just one word, and it fits on my slide better. That's going to be 11 through 13. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the people who were around them, and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. They fell away. Apostasy is falling away. Let me ask you a question. In this list, are there multiple things that they're doing wrong? I'm not necessarily sure that there's, Dave's shaking his head yes, and I think so too, Dave, but I'm not asking the question to say, yes, there's a right answer. I'm genuinely asking the question, what did they do wrong here? What are the things that went wrong in these 3 verses? If we can itemize them.
They abandoned God.
Okay, let's talk about that one. Let's get more on the list first. That way we can compare and contrast.
They went after other gods.
Okay, so that's my question. Is abandoning God and going after other gods, are those 2 separate things? And what do they look like? Tracy and then Ryan.
I kind of think they're the same, because it's like we discussed with idolatry, if you don't put God in that space, then you're going to put something in that space. And so maybe just a filler for the space that something's going to go there. You're going to have another God to worship, whether it be Baal or whatever.
Yeah, that's my hesitation too. They kind of feel the same, and that's the reason why I asked this question, is because there are a couple of things listed here, but abandoning God and going after other gods could be one thing. So yeah, I feel what you're saying there. Ryan?
Kind of looking at it from, God compares the evilness of his people to adultery a lot of times. And, if you look at it from that standpoint, you think, okay, if my wife just gets sick of me because, I keep leaving the lid off the toothpaste and she takes off, it's like, okay, I kind of get that. I don't like living with me either. But, if she finds somebody that she likes better than you,
That's different.
kind of like twist the knife a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's different. So, and that's the reason why. So yes, I'm the abandoned and that thing too, where it's like, I'm not going to serve God anymore. And in addition to not serving God anymore, oh look, other gods, I'm going to go worship them. So all of this is going to mean something for us. I would like to show you something here real quick. We're probably going to spend more time on this point than any of the others tonight. And so don't think that I'm just getting wild on this one point and then going to overlook everything else. We're going to spend some time here because I kind of lean towards the second one, Ryan, and what you're saying, because Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, in the eyes of the Lord. I would choose, in my Bible, this is what I would do, and I'll make a case for this. Where it says in verse 11, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, I crossed out sight and I wrote eyes. It's the same Hebrew word. I'm not changing the word of God by doing that. But I did that for this reason. The people of Israel did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. This seems to be the main interpretive lens for the book of Judges. It's everything that's wrong with this book. And so look at chapter 3 and verse 7. This is what starts our first cycle with Othniel. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight, in the eyes of the Lord. God looks at them and he says, that's not right. In my eyes, that's not right. In verse 12, the people of Israel again, we're going to start now. Start noticing the word again, since this is cycle. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Chapter 4 and verse 1, the people of Israel again did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord after Ehud died. And you can see the rest of the verses up there. Most of our Judges cycles start with this. I don't know if there's something to this or not. 833 is different. It doesn't say the eyes. It says they whored after other gods. It's the same concept. As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals. If you take that one out, then there's 7 of these in Judges. There's 7 times that he said they did evil in the eyes of God. And anytime I see something like that, I think, oh, hey, God's making a point. Maybe, maybe not. But you could say, well, what about this one? Well, this one is on the downside. We passed Gideon, who's the middle point of Judges, and he's not going to say that they did evil in the eyes of God. He's going to say they whored after the Baals. He's going to describe it in ugly language, which really paints for us, from this point on, everything is bad. Or worse. It gets worse from this point on. And so the eyes of the Lord. Everything's bad in the eyes of the Lord. And then you come to the end of Judges, and you have these, there's 2 of them that say this. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's the reason why I stick with eyes. Eyes here and sight in these is the same word, same Hebrew word. So right in his own sight would be fine. Right in his own eyes is fine. That's perfectly fine. And that starts this last section of Judges, and then it ends in chapter 21 and verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So now that you're thinking this, Judges is framed by apostasy, by every cycle, every single story in Judges starts with Israel did what was evil in God's eyes. They abandoned the Lord. And the book ends with, and they did what was right in their own eyes. And they served other gods. I don't know if that's intended to go like that or not. But this idea of God's eyes, not doing what God wants us to do, my eyes, doing whatever I feel like doing, whatever I think is right, whatever I want to do, that's the problem in Judges. Yeah, Mark?
You think about Samson. In Samson 14 and verse 7, it says, he went down and talked with a woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes.
Yes.
And then in chapter 16, 1, and the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes.
Yeah.
Brought him down to Gaza.
It's the same story. He's the last judge making the point with Samson. If you look, 14:1. Samson went down to Timnah. At Timnah, he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. At the end of verse 3, Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she's right in my eyes." That's our sentence. In verse 7, he went down and talked to the woman. She was right in Samson's eyes. You're not supposed to. In just a second, one of the things that we're going to see is the problem with Israel is that they're marrying foreign women, and Samson is involved with this Philistine woman who's, hey, she looks good to me. That's right in my eyes. And the end of his story is his eyes get poked out. It's the book of Judges, right there. Yeah. Other comments or thoughts about the eyes, Adam?
Sorry to leave Judges for just a second, but maybe to connect with the Sermon on the Mount that we're going to. We're not far from in Matthew 6. Jesus, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. So it's almost like this is a timeless principle with God that what you're looking at, and it's another way to say what your heart is going after, that's going to set the course that you will ultimately fulfill.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What about this? So the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and the tree was desired to make one wise. That's where it all started. Right in my own eyes. What do you other comments on that? I got some stuff that I want to say about this. I'm curious where your mind is on it, Dave.
I was curious about, because the way this is described about the generation that did not know the work of the Lord, I question why. Why did they not know the work of the Lord? And I know that knowing and how God often uses it, how knowing the Lord is an intimate knowledge, but often an experience of knowledge, and that's something that's, to me, should be attributed to the salvation that they received through the time of Joshua and Exodus. And I'm persuaded that the generation prior that did know the work of the Lord were so impressed, those that, didn't wander in the wilderness, were so impressed of God's saving deliverance that they couldn't do anything but serve the Lord. But I'm wondering if it's kind of a situation where you see people who are saved in their adulthood, but their children are lost. And I think about the requirements that are there for the great responsibility on parents to be impressed with God and express that impression on their children, and that I am impressed by God, and I think you should be too, and here's why.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there was a gap there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm going to make a case for this quarter is that the problem is a lack of male leadership. That is the problem in the book of Judges. And I can't necessarily just give that to you right now. But dads and husbands are and male leaders are the problem. Because these sections start with Joshua's dead. So who's going to lead Israel? And then look at the last one, 17:6. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And then you've got two in the middle, 18:1. There's no king in Israel. 19:1. There's no king in Israel. 21:25, the last. In those days there's no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. What's the problem? Here's the problem. Israel is abandoning the Lord, and they're going after what is right in their own eyes, which means there's no leader in place to say, come on, everybody, let's serve God. and I say, ooh, I like that. And the leader says, no, you're not allowed to do that. We're not doing that. What we need is leadership to say, let's serve God. No, you can't do this thing that you want to do. What's right in your own eyes. Now, I'm just throwing out a thesis for you right now, and I think what I've got is 10 more classes to try and make the case for that. So if you disagree with me, then you'll have to tell me at the 1st of April. Yeah, Dan?
I agree with you. It's the lack of leadership. But I always think that, of course, I love like history, like generational knowledge, right? World War I was the war to end all wars. I'm 40 years old, and I don't think I've ever met a World War I veteran. It's like reading, because there's not a personal connection to it. It's like reading the Civil War. You know? I mean, they're just names. It's just something that happened in the past, and I think it's the lack of male leadership that I'm pressing the importance of what God did for them. That you get 2-3 generations down and grandma's dead. Okay, God saved us from the Red Sea and fed us in the wilderness, but that was 150 years ago.
Yeah.
Everyone that had a personal connection or knew someone is gone.
Yeah.
And we see it in our own history.
Yeah.
And because of the lack of leadership, they don't have the connection to God to keep them grounded.
Yeah. So that's kind of what led to World War II, was the World War I generation said, we don't want to do that again. And so the monster was built because they remembered. But then the next generation said, hey, let's go for a fight. You know?
Then you the Joshua. We talk about how Jesus and Joshua, the picture of Joshua is Christ. The similarities there. So you see that we need a leader. Christ is leader. But then also part of that equation is you gotta have people willing to submit to that leader. That generation of Joshua, they were willing to do that. So very similar to the situation we're in. We have a leader who wants to guide us in the right direction. Are we willing to go there?
Yeah. Yeah. Remember when I said in our last class, Judges chapter 1 and verse 2, the Lord said, Judah shall go up, behold, I have given the land in his hand. And Judah said to Simeon, his brother, come up with me into the territory allotted to me, that we fight against the Canaanites. And cooperation and working together led to this thing. So yes, 100% what you're saying there, Ed. I want to keep the cycle going, but we can come back to this as we go. You're welcome to go backwards and make your comments, because you may think of other things as we go, and I'm really interested in application in some of this. But let me just push the ball forward just a little bit. Our B is going to be bondage. Chapter 2, verses 14 and the first part of 15. So they abandoned the Lord, they went after other gods. 14. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so they could no longer withstand their enemies. Did I say 15? First part of 15. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm. Listen to that. God is not only not fighting for Israel, he is against them, bringing oppressors to hold them down, to punish them, actively to punish them for their abandoning him and for going after these other gods. So you've got bondage. This one is a little hairy in this one. The C is cries to God. That's what I'm going to call C. But in this cycle, at the end of verse 15, you can barely see it. It says, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn by them, and they were in terrible distress. That's the way that one reads. But if you look at chapter 3 and verse 9, all of the other ones sound a little bit different. Let's start in verse 7 so you can see the cycle, this first one in the cycle. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, that's number 3, C. And in all of the other cycles you're going to see, cried out to the Lord. They're the same thing. They're in terrible distress, and they're saying, God, save us from this. I didn't stop after bondage. I'll stop after this one. Any thoughts about apostasy, bondage, crying out to God in distress?
What verse did you just end at?
I'm sorry.
What verse did you just
In the end, okay, so if you're writing A, B, C, D in your Bible, it's the last part of verse 15 where it says, and they were in terrible distress. That's the one that I'm treating as this part of the cycle. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And then I also, to keep that C, I also would at least point to Othniel to say where they cried out to God so I can see it and remember that. Where do you think D is going to be? D gives them a deliverer. That's going to be the next one in our cycle. Where are we with deliverer? Chapter 2 and verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. God gives the people a deliverer. What do you think E's going? And the deliverers are the characters in the book. So Othniel. The book is called Judges. Othniel is the deliverer, the judge. Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Barak, Gideon. We'll go through the list and we'll see these different deliverers. That's what this book is, to talk about their story. And then E, what's E going to be? Enjoys rest. Is it up there already, or do you just guess? Because you were here 7 years ago. See? That's why I write in my Bible. I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. Thank you for making that point. They enjoy rest after this. So chapter 3 and verse 2. No, I don't think we have this one in the chapter 2 section unless you can see that. Turn over to chapter 3 and verse 11. Back to the Othniel example. Verse 9, so it's familiar. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer, judge for the people of Israel, who saved them. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord was upon him. He judged Israel. He went out to war. And the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed. This class is called Prevail. And his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim, so the land had rest 40 years. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. And so you can just look near the end of each one of these sections, chapter 3 and verse 30. Moab was subdued, this is with Ehud, that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. You're not going to see rest at the end of the book of Judges, but at least in the first part, the deliverers give the people a sense of rest. Anything you want to say about that? Just remember A, B, C, D, E. That's all you got to do. There's one more piece to this, though, that's really, really important to remember. And then we'll stop and talk about it up to this point. So let's start in verse 16, and we will read down to verse 19. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them, yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked. That's a nice Bible way describing our ancestors. They turned away from the ways that their fathers had walked. I'm going to really stick to that. In this book of Judges, they didn't follow their dad, because I'm going to see this overwhelming theme of male leadership and the failure of male leadership throughout Judges. So I'm going to really hang on to that word here. They soon turned away from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. You could maybe put that next to, you could put enjoyed rest next to that if you wanted. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back. This is where you start highlighting things. This one to me is the most important verse we're going to look at tonight. This is going to be critical for understanding what we're going to see in the book of Judges. They turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods. I take that to be even more than the ones that their fathers went after, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he said, because this people has not obeyed my voice, and we're already in this idea of a cycle. But this two-dimensional cycle, I don't like the word Judges cycle when we talk about it like that, because it makes me think we're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. This is the part of the conversation I want to turn practical. When we find ourselves in this cycle, doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, is that the way it works? No, it gets worse. It's a three-dimensional spiral. And so that's what this, I'm going to rely more on this. This is the side view of what we looked at just a second ago. What we were looking at was the top of this to see the cycle. Now we're looking at the side, and we're just going to see everything get more corrupt. They're going to add gods. They're going to not drop any of the practices of anybody before them. And so I'll stop here for just a second. You can make any comments you want about the spiral and the cycle, but one thing that I'd really like to hear about is your own experiences with not breaking the cycle and how it doesn't stay the same. It gets worse. Anybody want to make any comments or talk about that? Yeah. Nobody wants to talk about that. Listen to this. I read this and I thought I have to share this with you. Sin is remarkably generative. Sin yields more and more sin. In a standard scenario, each episode of sin gets triggered by trouble from the last. Sin is a plague that spreads by contagion or even by quasi-genetic reproduction. It is a polluted river that keeps branching and rebranching into tributaries. It's a whole family of fertile and contentious parents, children, and grandchildren. If we don't, this is the point where we need to stop and get something from this class. If we don't find some way to stop this cycle in our lives, in our church, in our country, whatever it is, if we don't find some way to stop this cycle, we're not just going to keep repeating the same stuff over and over again. It's going to get worse, and then it's going to get worse, and then it's going to get worse, and then we're going to end up in Judges chapter 19 with some of the worst stories in the entire Bible, what you were talking about the other day. Judges is a toilet bowl, and it ends in the sewer because they can't figure out how to stop this cycle. And so let's think about this for a second. You see the cycle from the top view. You see this. How do we stop this? if you're in the judges, in the day of the judges, or you are brave enough to admit this in your own life, how do you put an end to this? Just not keep going around and around and around and around. What do we do about it? Dave, you look like you got one, and then Jonathan.
There's a passage in Ecclesiastes that says something to the effect in the days, in the days of adversity, consider, what is it, 7:14? Is that it? Ecclesiastes 7:14. Says, in the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. But what I was really thinking of when I was thinking about that was when there's times of rest, there's a proverb that says, love not sleep, lest something to the effect of, lest you become or succumb to poverty. And when you think about that, you often think of work. So you're sleeping through work, or you're sleeping through your responsibility. But the reality is, don't love rest to the point that you're lacking doing any effort towards your spiritual work, your own self-reflection, because like you were saying, when the foothold of what I was thinking about when you're talking about our things that we struggle with in the downward spiral, I mean, when I hold a grudge on someone, and maybe I don't even know it, but when I look at them, that's what I think about. And so, I mean, all of us have heard probably that when we hold a grudge against someone, it's like, well, I'm going to drink poison to spite you. It's like, well, that makes no sense. Yeah. And the reality is, when we get to a point of rest, that doesn't mean we drop all sense of any work or effort, but it's to be enjoyed, yes, but I mean,
Yeah. How many times in Ed's Joshua class did he said, we can't let our guard down? That's what we're talking about here. Jonathan, you had a comment. Go ahead.
I was just thinking about, like, this could have just been, I mean, you think about the first failure in the book of Judges. Why did it have to, like, repeat? That once you start failing, it's easy to view failure as something that can happen, like something that can happen and be recovered from. You might brush it off and say that's not a big deal, and then take for granted where you might stumble the next time. And so I'm just thinking about making a conscious decision to stay on the good side of that cycle, or that trying to stay in that enjoys rest, having a deliverer, having somebody to remind you of God's will, having something, maybe an institution in place or a person in place, or something to keep in check.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, I'm just thinking about my own struggles and struggles with people in general as well. I mean, if you get into a cycle, you start to normalize that action. Like if there's a trigger or something for you, I mean, if you put any vice into that, it just becomes something that you start to become more and more accustomed to, just on a personal level.
Yeah, thank you. I've got Cherry.
Well, I was thinking, if it's me, and that's my cycle of sin, for me to break that cycle, it starts with me holding me accountable, and not looking around and trying to blame somebody else for how I got into this, or any of that. It starts with me saying, okay, I'm the one who's choosing to sin. And that's the only way that I'm going to break that for myself.
Yeah. There's a lot of personal accountability in this. Let me ask you this question. There's lots of comments here. I like it. I'll hold off on this next point, but let me tell you. What started this cycle, what was our first conversation tonight? The two things that led to this cycle. They abandoned the Lord and they pursued the Baals. They didn't do what was right in God's eyes, and they did what was right in their own eyes. How do we stop the cycle? Do what's right in God's eyes. Don't do what's right in our own eyes. Probably overly simplistic, but I mean, that's the way my brain works. Chad?
Yeah, maybe just build up a little bit on Sherry's comment. I mean, I feel like there's this cycle at different levels, maybe in my life, right? So, and it's a matter of some of them may go quickly through the cycle, right? But it seems to follow us. I mean, there seems to be coming to a point where if you're slipping away, you gotta somewhere realize, kind of Sherry's point, and hold yourself accountable, which is kind of at what point do you cry to God? Now, that point may be a month, that point may be a year, but at some point, things in different versions of what doesn't kill you make you stronger type philosophy. At some point, cry to God, and I think that's through the different challenges and tests that we sometimes get put through. He's always there for us, but if we're not recognizing that, it's like, all right, when are you going to give? All right, you going to give now? And I think here you've got a multitude on a big level that makes this so severe to turn this ship versus the little things that we may go unnoticed, but it probably falls in the cycle.
Yeah. Katie, did you have one?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, at points in my life where I feel like I'm just in this, like, continual loop. Something I feel like that has helped me, or like maybe a nugget of advice that I've heard that has helped me is, like, you have to let sin break your heart as much as it breaks the Lord's heart. And I think, like, maybe that was a problem in my life for some instances, was like, okay, yes, I'm crying out to God because I recognize that there's a problem, and, like, I feel I'm mourning in my heart, and I have this, like, but I think what's helped me in the past is, like, remembering how much it breaks my heart to sin against the Lord, and how much sin breaks my heart. And I think that's obviously, like, still a work in progress because I continue to fall short, and I always will. But I think that's helped me as, like, these Israelites, like, it obviously didn't hurt their heart that much because then they were there, and I just think seeing it like God sees it, sin.
Yeah. Yes. So here's my takeaways. Apostasy will always end in bondage. Be sure your sin will find you out. If you're going to abandon the Lord and do what's right in your own eyes, there's only one end in that road. It's not going to end well. If you are in bondage, there's only one way out, and that is to cry to God. And here's Chad's point. You can do that now, or you can wait 10 years and live in bondage. But crying out to God is our answer. That's the way out. And chapter 10 is one of my favorites in the book because God says, I'm not saving you anymore. And then God goes, okay, fine, I'll save you. He always will save us. There will always be a deliverer when we cry out to God for help. And then enjoys rest. This is another one that I think of. I got two more. Enjoys rest. This is scary to me. We may have different opinions about this. Ellisville right now is right here, enjoying rest. What's next for us if we're not careful? If we're not paying attention and keeping our head to serve the Lord and not do our own thing? Well, you know what's next. You can see the circle. It only goes one place if we're not careful. And the next thing after that is this scary thing. You see it in the marriage spiral. You see it in the pornography spiral. You see it in every spiral. It gets harder every time. if you don't break the spiral and you just keep on and keep on and keep on, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And the moral of the story is stop. Don't abandon the Lord and don't pursue what's right in your own eyes. All right. Thanks for class tonight. That was a good class. Here's what we're going to do next time. Read Othniel. And this is what I got to tell you about. There's 2 places where you find Othniel. You find one in chapter 1 and you find one in chapter 3. Read every word slowly and tell me what was great about Othniel and his marriage and him as a man. We'll do that next Wednesday.